Samsung needs to evolve or die. I've been a huge fan of the Z Flip ever since the very first generation back in 2020. To me, it was the first time a foldable phone actually made sense. It wasn't some science experiment, but it also had extra features like an outside display, could stand up like its own tripod. But fast forward almost 5 years, and I gotta be honest with you, I have stopped using the Z Flip, especially after years of mediocre, half-assed updates. I was done. Which brings me to the brand new Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. And while it's certainly less than perfect, there are some things this phone does that I don't think any foldable has ever done in the past. Is it really enough to win me back, or am I gonna go back to the non-folding life? I'll go back to being straight. Wait, no, wait.
Oh my God.
Here's the thing. Foldables are an incredibly important business for Samsung. Now, if you think about it, there is a reputation that Samsung has had, rightly or wrongly deserved, that they are always following Apple. I think if you really get into it, everyone copies everyone, but foldables are one of those very few areas where no one can argue that they are doing anything besides innovating. As always, I think a lot of it boils down to money. Samsung are one of the biggest smartphone manufacturers in the world, but as far as the profit goes, foldables are a huge proportion of this, because if you think about it, while Samsung sell tons of $200 and $300 phones, there's very little profit in that. However, when you're talking about a $1,000 or $2,000 folding phone, that is a much more lucrative market. Samsung released their first foldable in 2019. And the best estimate is that Apple won't release their first foldable iPhone until 2026. But by that same token, I think that Samsung have absolutely wasted years of their lead. If you look at the market share, Samsung have actually been going down in market share, largely because the Chinese companies have absolutely been taking the lead when it comes to innovation. If you take a look at the Z Flip 3, I think you can get a little bit of an idea for what I'm talking about as far as just the stagnation. Not only was this hilariously sort of compromised, I mean, this outer display is just absurdly tall and narrow to the point where many apps don't feel remotely right. It's also heavy, it's thick, the hinge has a gap, and while some of these issues have been slowly worked away on the Z Fold 4 and the Z Fold 5 and the Z Fold 6, but for the last several years, I would say that every single one of these phones was a compromised, expensive mess. Thank you to VIAIM for sponsoring this video. Do you have a lot of meetings, calls, or covert operations for work? Well, with the VIAIM RecDot earbuds, they can absolutely help, because unlike boring regular earbuds, these do a lot more. The RecDot's flash record feature lets you easily live record any meeting, whether it's in a small conference room in person, a phone call, or a video chat. Just one press and you're recording. You don't have to worry about external notifications interrupting if you're recording on the phone, or you have to juggle different note takers based on each platform you're on. The RecDot app also provides real-time transcription during recording. It's smart enough to format for you, and you can highlight important segments for future reference during recording. It can also provide translation in 16 languages. And after your meeting is through, VIAIM AI can extract a to-do list and summary from your transcription so you can get right to work. In a noisy environment, RecDot features 4-mic noise cancellation for calls, including a bone mic that picks up your voice through your skull to deliver even clearer audio to whoever you're talking to. It's honestly pretty cool. Ready to up your productivity game? Well, check out the VIAIM RecDot at the link in the description, and thank you again to VIAIM for sponsoring this video. All this talk about the Z Flip and the Z Fold, it comes from a place of genuine love for the segment. I have used the Z Flip for so long, or at least I did use the Z Flip for so long, because I was so sold on the premise, on the concept of what it could be. I think about that first Z Flip, and honestly the first couple of years, Samsung made huge strides really quickly, but then they kind of stopped. And the problems, well, they just hadn't been solved yet. I remember I've had a number of issues with my Z Flips over the years, whether it be the screen protectors that would bubble up. I've had a Z Flip screen just completely die on me. I've had hinge issues. I think where the problem has come in is that Samsung kind of stopped trying for a while. You know, when I would get an update where they give me a slightly better camera, and the next year, oh, the screen got a little bit bigger. Meanwhile, the core issues with the Z Flip and the Z Fold were absolutely still there. And so when you put all this together, last year, I just gave up on the Z Flip. This was the context of when I went to Samsung's Unpacked event last week. I was intrigued because I'm like, oh, you know what? I think the Z Flip 7 is probably gonna bring me back. In reality, I've come across with an incredibly different opinion on the foldable scene as a whole. All this brings us to the current moment with this, the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7, the brand new device that they have just announced. And I gotta say, this is certainly not a perfect phone. Some of the compromises, again, are less than ideal. So one of the big ones is the lack of S Pen support. I never had S Pen on my phone, so not a huge deal to me personally, but I know that a huge number of power users have relied on the S Pen for generations. Then there's the battery. So the Z Fold 7 has a 4,400 milliamp hour battery. Now that's the same size as last generation, but the issue is that most of the competition are using silicon carbon batteries, much bigger batteries in the same kind of form factor. Now I understand that Samsung have a little bit of a history with batteries, but I look at something like the Z Fold 7, or I really look at something like the Galaxy S25 Edge, which actually been with a phone I've been daily driving lately. These are thin phones that push the envelope of what you could pull off in this sort of form factor, and both of which have bad battery life. These would be the perfect test cases for Samsung to figure out their silicon carbon battery sort of workflow to give these significantly more battery. It is one knock against these phones, right? And there's also a weird one here, which is the inner camera. Samsung pioneered the under-display camera a few years ago. And while the cameras themselves were not very good when it came to the image quality, it was actually really cool to have the camera dot completely disappear. However, they've dropped that as well on the Z Fold 7. So instead you have a perfectly reasonable front-facing camera, which I will argue is better from a usability standpoint. But again, it would have been nice to see Samsung continue to iterate on the tech versus just using it for a few years and just giving up. Well, the camera bump. This has the most egregious camera bump I have ever seen. Look at this phone. Like, watch how long it would just sit there and wobble when sitting on a table. And while I do wish the camera bump wasn't so huge, it is so large because they finally put good cameras on the Z Fold. This is a really tough phone to talk about because there's so many good things. But for every great thing, there are these things that I'm just like, I gotta be honest. I actually wasn't going to make a video on the Z Fold at all this year. So I went out to Samsung Unpacked last week and I, sat through the presentation and talking about the Fold and the Flip, and to me, I was pretty much just listening to the Flip. Because let me be honest, the Fold in the past has been, I think, just a messy, disappointing phone. I sit there through the briefing, I try the Z Flip 7, I'm like, oh, you know what, there's some nice upgrades, it's a little bit thinner. And so after Unpacked, I was on Samsung.com, I was ready to pre-order it. So Samsung are very kind in giving us review units, but obviously those are review units, so I was going to buy my own Z Flip 7. But right as I was hovering over the checkout button, I hesitated. I didn't do it. And so when the Z Fold 7 landed in my hand, something clicked for me that had never clicked before. This phone is it. I know I just said a whole lot of negative things about Samsung and their foldables and the battery life and the S Pen and all these things. All valid. But I think when you hold this phone, when you experience what they have done with the engineering on this, I'm a believer. The Fold has always promised to be that phone that's a regular phone on the outside and then you unfold it and you've got an 8-inch tablet, right? But it's never really delivered on that in my opinion. But this is the first time where the Z Fold, I think, actually has lost the compromise. You don't even need to open this phone and you can feel like it is an absolutely regular phone that's just ever so slightly narrow. The camera's very solid. You've also got the ultra wide as well as a 3x telephoto. And when you open this phone, when you feel how thin it is, and importantly when you realize how light it is, this 8-inch phone, this little mini tablet, weighs less than a Galaxy S25 Ultra. I understand that I am probably a little bit in the minority here, but when I'm using a phone, I appreciate a phone that is something different. I mean, I think there's a reason why many people like a nice car or a mechanical watch. There's something tactile about that that to me is important. Like I use the iPhone as an example here. The iPhone is unbelievably great in almost every way. So much so that it's boring. It's a slap. It does nothing for me emotionally. It's just a phone that I just use as a tool and whatever. But something like the Z Flipper, especially the Z Fold, it makes me feel like this is like the promise. This is what we were supposed to get with folding phones. Well, besides the fact that it's $2,000, which you could say is a pretty serious compromise. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time talking about the Flip 7. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a decent upgrade in a vacuum. So the phone is physically wider, it's thinner. It also has a much more usable cover display. But ultimately, it's still very much the same Flip that we all know and love-ish. Especially considering that they have dropped the Snapdragon processor in favor of an Exynos, which we need to spend some more time with, but doesn't seem like a particularly strong upgrade. In fact, it feels like it's side grade more than anything else. It really pales in comparison to what they've done with the Fold. But what I really am encouraged by is Samsung going out and really trying. They have been resting on their laurels for a long time. And especially with the looming threat of the foldable iPhone next year, you know that you may love or hate Apple. You know they're gonna make a very, very beautiful piece of hardware that's probably gonna solve a bunch of the problems with the hinge and yada yada yada. Which means that Samsung has every reason to not only have brought out the Z Fold 7, but on top of that, to continue working. Keep bringing out the weird designs. Keep giving me bigger batteries. Give me better cameras. Like, we cannot do a $2,000 phone every year that has a minor little spec bump. Everyone is moving forward, not only with the iPhone, but you're also seeing these huge gains from companies such as Honor, from such as Huawei. You've got Motorola. But I say all this cautiously optimistic that we are dealing with a new Samsung who are actually giving a shit about design in a way that they have not in a very long time. You know, I was thinking recently about Apple, which I know I've talked a lot about Apple in a Samsung video, but Apple brought out the iPhone to kill off their most successful product, which was the iPod. Now that seems obvious in hindsight. Of course, the iPhone is this massive success, but it is a crazy thing for a company to bring out a product that kills their successful golden goose. But if you don't do that, you're falling behind. There's a reason why you don't buy a BlackBerry anymore. You don't buy a Nokia phone anymore. And I think that Samsung over the last few years had the lead in foldables. Like, there's a scenario in which if Samsung would have pushed super hard, we would all be using $600 Z Flips right now. But they didn't have the competition and they didn't have the drive to do it. And now that we see the Chinese companies absolutely crushing it, now that we see that Apple are hopefully going to be getting into that foldable game in the next year or so, I don't think it's a coincidence that suddenly we get the first Z Fold that's actually a good phone. Is the Z Fold 7 actually worth it? I would argue yes. Now, is everyone supposed to go out and spend $2,000 on this phone? Of course not. But if you were even considering it, this, I really do believe, is the most badass phone you can possibly buy right now, and I'm going to be buying one for myself. But I'm very curious, what do you think about the Z Fold, and what do you think about where folding phones are today? I would love to say that we're at the dawn of a new era, or maybe we're gonna spend another 5 years in the wilderness. Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this video. If you'll excuse me, I gotta go spend a lot of money on a Mint Z Fold. I think I want a Mint Z Fold. Samsung needs to evolve or die. Here's the thing. Wow, it's really satisfying funk.